Alright, hell yeah. So someone wanted me to go over continuous functions. Now this is not going to be a complete solution. I'm going to show that both of these, I don't even know what I'm going to show, but I already looked it up. And this is a problem I couldn't do. I don't, you know what I mean? A lot of math problems are like, hey, maybe if this was a portion of a textbook where you talked about continuous functions and all the things that could go on, you know what I mean? So hell yeah. So this is an absolute value sign. That's what we're going to show first. It's for these, it's going to say, hey, if g of x, if this is continuous, does that mean that f of x is continuous? Or could f of x be discontinuous? And I didn't even know what a continuous and discontinuous function is. I still don't. Actually, I think, you know what I mean, I have to Google this, but I think if a function, you know, like does this, but then just has a hollow spot, maybe at x is equal to 0, that can happen a lot. I think that might even be continuous. I think discontinuous is where you have something like that, you know, like a definite split. That's discontinuous. This is discontinuous, I think, at that point, but I don't know. So anyway, I'll have to look that one up. But I don't know how to represent, you know, a function like this. But even now that I'm saying I don't know how to do it, like I'm just like, oh, okay, I get it now. Because this is how they represented f of x. They're like, well, hey, let's say f of x is, and you probably wouldn't even have to get too technical with this. But what they do, I thought this was very interesting. They're going to say f of x is a combination of two things. You know what I mean? So here's how you use that. You know what I mean? It's like a bunch of if-then statements or something like that. You know, it's gonna fall into one of two categories. Now this is still, we're just talking about f of x now. You know what I mean? And we're trying to make a discontinuous function that when we take the absolute value, it becomes a continuous function. And that's what we're going to show. And so that would make this one incorrect because we can show that this can be discontinuous. We're also going to show that this can be discontinuous. And so the function that AI on Google made was just like, hey, let's say this is 1. And then they did this. They said x, and they used this symbol, and they used q. And then they did -1, x, they used this symbol, put a slash through it, and q. And this is why I don't like math. But I do like AI because now I can actually type this in. You know, I typed in like what is x, xe. I just put in xe slash q. And then in math, I said this. In math, what does this mean? And it said this is, q is rational numbers. So rational numbers are like -1/2. An irrational number is the square root of 2. It has no definite end to its decimal and cannot be represented. Not that it doesn't, you know, I mean, 1/3 has no representative end of its decimal, but it's still a rational number. It can be represented as, you know what I mean, one number over two numbers, a over b, where a and b are integers. I think that is the definition of rational number. Irrational numbers. And so this is interesting because I was just like, well, even in Google AI, I was like, well, graph this. You know what I mean? And you can't. This one's a tricky one because if you started at 0, let's start at 0 and you're going to be at 1 and -1 for irrational numbers. And let's say the only irrational number I know is square root 2, which is 1.4, and pi, which is 3.14. You know, so I'm gonna be at 1 for all the rational numbers until I get to 1.14. But this is not true. And what the hell is going to happen at 1 point? Am I going to have a point because I know that one? I know that square root 2. And then I know that, hey, this is pi, and so I'm going to go down to -1. Well, sure, I guess I could do that. And so that's how that would look. But they said this graph is going to be infinitely continuous and discontinuous just because there's rational numbers in between non-irrational numbers, and there's an infinite many rational numbers between irrational numbers. But that is what that graph would look like. So what it seems like you could set this up way simpler, but that's how Google AI did it. Now, so we finally understand that this is a discontinuous function. Hell yeah, we're only in 5 minutes, but but once we take the absolute value of this, because the outputs are going to be 1 and -1, if I take the absolute value of this, well, now the -1 becomes 1, and the entire line now fits just at this value of 1. All of the irrational numbers pop up to here after you take the absolute value, and they form a continuous function. So that's kind of cool. And that one implies that, well, f can be discontinuous. And then we're going to do the same thing for f of x squared. If I take that same function that Google AI helped me with, and then I square it, then the -1 squared becomes +1. The 1 squared keeps 1. And then so, again, like all those numbers that were down here are now on a continuous line and fill in all those gaps. So they definitely fill in all those gaps. Hell yeah. And, I don't know. I mean, couldn't you just say, hey, 1 for positive number? I don't know how functions are written. So this is kind of, this intrigues me from a mathematical perspective of like, well, can't you just choose anything over here? I don't get why this, can only be a few things, or I don't know. You know what I mean? I really don't know the language of math when it comes down to stuff like that. But that's why I enjoyed this, because the answer involved a little piece of language, and we found out what the hell Q meant. It meant rational. This slash meant not irrational. And hell yeah. And so those are the ones that I was able to do. For this one, this is kind of interesting. All they did for... Nah, I'm not even going to go into it. That's the only 2 I knew for this. The other 2, even from the answers, I'll say the answer's wrong. I need to do more study. But hell yeah. My brother even told me today. He gave me a book of puzzles. And he's like, you know what I mean? Don't mind quickly looking at the answers in the back of the book. Because if you're able to understand what the answer is, someone finding a solution and then you just figuring out how they got their solution, you can use that knowledge later. And you know what I mean? And this is a perfect example. It's just like, I don't care at all. Even the student who's learning this has got to be just learning it just because they have to. It's like, no one really cares. And then you get something kind of convoluted that is just like, I don't know. And hell yeah. So we did... So we looked up a solution, and I was able to learn from that. So I did learn a few things today. I learned what the symbol was, rational, irrational. I learned even what an irrational number compared to a rational number is. It's always good to refresh yourself. All right, we're done. Thanks for joining me. Booyah.